So for this talk, I just joined together two concepts that are related to my recent interests. One is on metadata curation for the cultural heritage, and the second one is this idea of representing processes and workflows to make data science explainable. Now, these two things are intuitively quite far from each other, but then for this talk, I try to do something a bit of an experimentation of putting these two concepts together and see what happens. So I'm Enrico Daga. I worked at the Knowledge Media Institute of the Open University, and I work with web semantics since about 15 years. And my current focus is on knowledge graph applications in a variety of data-intensive scenarios, and particularly cultural heritage in this last 2-3 years. So that's just to give a bit of preliminaries about why, about what I'm going to talk about and the motivation behind what I'm going to talk about. So cultural heritage institutions have the objective to preserve cultural artifacts, okay, that are of some value, in terms artistically or historically and so forth. And in the last in the new century, the idea of the objectives of cultural heritage institutions kind of was extended, particularly within the idea that these institutions are not only supposed to preserve the objects and their culture, but also their objective includes engaging people and impacting society from that. In particularly, the sectors of society that are typically excluded from the reception of cultural heritage. So this has been kind of announced as a kind of a general vision in the FARO Convention in 2005, but still it's difficult to realize this kind of vision. In 2015, it was observed how higher socioeconomic groups accounted for 87% of museum visitors, with a particular clear exclusion of BAME citizens. So there's been a lot of activity in trying to improve the participation of citizens in cultural heritage. There has been a lot of many different directions for doing that, from using citizens to curate library metadata, but this mainly includes targets citizens that are willing to contribute, that are already probably engaged with cultural heritage. There is recently attempts to include alternative perspectives into the curation of cultural heritage, particularly to challenge dominant cultural narratives. There are grassroots projects, so there are communities that build their own archives to kind of develop their own evidence and their own perspective in society, but they're typically kind of disconnected from official cultural heritage. And then there is a lot of work in extended intelligence for cultural engagement. So how much new technologies and digital technologies can help into improving the interaction with citizens. So in the last kind of 3 years, I've been actively involved in this project. It's called SPICE. It was a European project. It finished now in April. And the objective was to study this new concept that we call citizen curation. Essentially, the idea is to apply extended technologies so that we can mediate between citizens and cultural heritage assets. And through the production, collection, and interpretation of people responses, we can favor the emergence of multiple perspectives and use them kind of to enrich the body of knowledge that surrounds cultural heritage artifacts. And so I will. So what I will go now through is to illustrate the SPICE case studies, because these are useful to the point I will try to make in the second part of the presentation. So bear with me for a few more minutes. So these were case studies included, for example, the pop-up VR museum. So the idea is we can apply new technologies so that people that cannot physically go to the museums can still experience the objects. In particular, this pilot was designed in the Design Museum of Helsinki by the Aalto University. In another case, you have a game. Essentially, this is a digital application, and users can combine artworks and build stories, connecting artworks, and annotate them with moods and reactions into a kind of a storytelling activity. Okay, so as you can see, already these two scenarios are quite different from each other. You know? In Israel, there's been the focus was on involving scholars and students, secondary school students, and try to elaborate short essays developing alternative opinions or conflicting opinions regarding historical facts that resonate with national issues. Okay, and in the Irish Museum of Modern Art, there is been experimented with a methodology for engaging with citizens and art called the slow looking methodology, where essentially users are guided through questions and prompts to react to specific images of artworks. And this has been done in this pilot. Users both participate into using this kind of scripts, but also they, in a second phase, they can design their own scripts, so they can design their own prompts and discuss what are their own questions. And finally, in a national sciences, in National Museum of Natural Sciences, a company called Paduan Games designed a treasure hunt. So essentially, in this modality, there is a game, a social game, and users need to look and move physically through the museum using AR and to interact with the collection and find answers and solve puzzles and quizzes and so forth. So during this project, my role was mainly the one of designing a data management infrastructure for all these things. Okay, so as you can imagine, there is a huge variety of objects that and applications that's been developed on top of this what we call the linked data hub, that try to mediate between cultural heritage collections and end user applications. And by doing that, we really hit a lot of complexity. And I'm not going to talk about the data infrastructure, okay, because that's the work that we have done. There is an article on the work at the moment. But essentially, what I'm trying to say here is that there is a great variety of applications that can instantiate this notion of citizen curation, but they all end up to produce a wealth of data that is of great interest to cultural heritage institutions for the reasons I was explaining before. So why these data are interesting and what are the challenges associated with them? So the first one is sense making. So typically, user responses are can be of great variety. It can be an emoticon associated with an artwork, can be a set of questions and answers, can be an action performed by the user with a VR or AR tool, and all these bits and pieces alone don't mean much. So to make sense of the way citizens interpret and relate to the cultural heritage through these systems, we need to have a context to understand what is the production context of this metadata. And to do that, we need to have an idea of how these applications built, what this application built between the cultural heritage archives and the user experience. What you see on the right is a very abstract conceptualization where some of these issues probably can emerge more clearly, and I will guide you through this right now. But the thing I want to highlight now is that there is a kind of mirroring situation between artists as content producers and citizens as content producers. Okay, so there is a level in which this workflow goes two ways. So from the artist to the cultural heritage institution, to the engagement professional or the company that builds the hub, to the end user, and backwards from the end user to the social media application or whatever engagement application they are using, then to the curation of the archival professional, and then finally to the heritage expert that wants to make sense and use this wealth of knowledge from citizen curation. So it's clear that there is another theme is ownership. So who owns this data? Who owns citizen curation responses? And what is the kind of copyrights associated with these combined objects that include images, workflows, and user-generated content? And this is particularly important because there are associated issues, including, for example, privacy and attribution, which brings me to another important angle, which is the fact that you can't control in full what people produce. No, they may produce content that is inappropriate. They may include personal identifiable information, violate privacy regulations. Clearly, museums need to be aware of this and needs to have means to analyze who produced what and possibly to moderate this content. One concern from museums is that if we automatically publish user responses, museums may be considered responsible for endorsing or condoning opinions that they may not want to support. And last but not least is the fact that this variety of assets may have different policies associated to them. So images may have copyright and licenses information, and this may apply to the citizen engagement application differently from to the user-generated content. All these rights may be conflicting, so there may be composite objects at some point that will include different terms of use. So knowing what is used when is kind of crucial to manage this data effectively. Then I raise this question. So what type of knowledge organization system can effectively support citizen curation? And now hopefully it becomes clearer why I talked about, at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned workflows, data journeys, data science, because these things, I think this is a notion that can be of great use in the context of managing citizen curation assets in cultural heritage. Now, let's try to kind of disentangle this notion. So in the sciences, data journeys is a concept that's been emerged recently and is related to the fact that data is moved from the production site to many other sites in which they are processed, mobilized, and repurposed. And therefore, understanding data journeys can provide an important lens on scientific research and development. Okay, and there has been a book that investigated this concept in various sciences. It's a very high level piece of work, but we can relate easily. I mean, I'm sure many of you can connect easily this notion to other classics in information science and computer science, like provenance and workflows, and semantic web research, which is the place where I come from, has looked into these issues quite intensely in the last 20 years. And we have clearly the provenance ontology. There's been discussion, there's been workflow motives to try to abstract scientific workflows in a number of general activities, and the data node ontology that I worked on during my PhD to represent and study how policies and processes kind of interact with each other. So together with Paul Groth, who is here and is going to talk later in the afternoon, don't miss that, we designed an ontology to explain data science pipelines. Okay, the idea is that data science pipelines are usually pieces of Python code. If you want to understand AI models, you need to also especially be able to manage and understand how they are trained, how they are produced. That was kind of the original idea, and we designed an ontology as a layered approach. So that's kind of the design principles. Now, it's not that important what is into the ontology, so how many classes, what types, etc., as much that there is a layered approach from the actual asset, which in our case is Python code, to more abstract representations. Okay, so that's the core idea. In this very confusing slide, you can see a graphical depiction of the data flow and a Python snippet. Okay, so if you like to, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but in case, there are a number of objects here, like the Melbourne data here is line 3, this one is another variable, it's line 4, and so forth. You can see that very quickly this graph of data-to-data relationships explodes and becomes very large, quite difficult to manage. This is why more abstract layers are needed in order so that we can support better sense making, better navigation, exploration of these pipelines, and why not supporting some metadata curation so that these workflows maybe can be annotated to support other perspectives and larger analysis. So this, in a nutshell, is the idea of applying data journeys and make them computational. So to have computational data journeys. So now it raises the question: so what this has anything to do with series and curation? So first of all, I didn't know how well to answer this question, and I hopefully I will partly answer this question today. I don't think this is the answer will be entirely satisfactory, but what I looked into is first of all to look into the activity types. Okay, so activity types that here you can see are typical activities that are relevant to data science and scientific workflows, like you do preparation, you do data cleaning, you do data analysis, you move data, you reuse stuff, and then you visualize the output somewhere. Usually you generate a diagram and so forth. So what I've done is I looked into the SPICE use cases and looked into what's actually happening instead in these use cases, where users kind of access artwork images from the Cultural Heritage Archives. They collect a number of them. They design some activity, for example, annotating them with elements of the treasure round, designing prompts and questions that can be useful for them. And they also are engaged in moderating the content. Okay, so there is a kind of fixing and removing stuff and cleaning data. And there is a lot of different type of analysis that these use cases were used for in the project, but mainly the interesting one are related to finding similarities and differences. So compare responses and developing thematic analysis, annotate these responses in specific ways, and using some qualitative methodologies as well as statistical ones. Okay. And then looking more at the kind of movement part of these workflows, most of them shared data among different systems and between different user interfaces and between different systems. They published the content and they used the intermediate infrastructures to kind of moderate and negotiate between the original systems, like the cultural heritage data management and metadata management systems, and the applications developed by the university, by the researchers, or by companies in the tourism sector. And then there is a reuse, clearly. They built new digitalized objects, so users can select things and move them around. And a lot of interesting things and diverse things are happening in the output stage, okay, where there is a lot of variety of modalities where this content can be presented, but also this includes a lot of user interaction. So the users are not only seeing the output of a process, but they are actively engaging in a much more dynamic dynamic sense. These include some storytelling, these include receiving recommendation, exploring data, is including interacting with cyber-physical systems. In some cases, there was a physical object that it was part of the activities. It can be games, puzzles, treasure hunts, and so forth. Nevertheless, we can fit these activities as extensions of DJO, which is quite promising, and partly answers the question whether this concept of data journeys applies to citizen curation applications. In my opinion, it actually applies, but clearly with some caveat. For example, we talked about in data science pipelines, there is a visualization, it's kind of the output part, while clearly this concept is too restrictive for our case, and we better, I would replace it with a kind of more general interact. But I think this is kind of a small limitation, I would say. And just to kind of, for completeness, we can look also into a collection of resource types. So in data science, we have data, and usually data stands for anything. You have different formats, but that's not really the point. While in this case, it's very important that resources are characterized. So a comment is different from an image, an emoticon is different from an emotion in the sense of an annotation. Characters, stories, photos, artwork metadata, and so forth. Interviews, they are all different objects and needs to be kind of treated as such. So what are the differences? So we already have seen some. So there is the need, for example, to extend the types. But I think that there is, and some of them I already mentioned, so there is a huge heterogeneity of activities, and operations are distributed on many systems. So in data science, we usually have one script, can be a Python notebook or can be a program, but generally you have the experiment there, no? So you have something to observe. The process is exposed clearly, which is not the case for citizen curation applications. And the activity is not linear. You don't have an input-output flow. You have a lot of interaction and a good variety of types of assets, as was mentioned. So this brings kind of the problem of how do we capture data journeys, because we don't have a single artifact that we can interrogate, that we can compute. Okay. And this brings kind of this working hypothesis now. And now this is really a working hypothesis. So I think in citizen curation, we cannot have one single design object that describes the actual citizen curation workflow. Although some pilots in SPICE developed scripts, no? So you have actually somehow a script for the citizen curation activity, but that's kind of an exceptional case. You don't have normally that when these applications are developed. But clearly we have a mediator, right? So all these applications can interact through a distributed infrastructure, and mediators can log events. So the idea is that we can add additional layers to the data journey in order to support the analysis of events. So what distributed systems do. And through these events, we may be able to at least build the body of knowledge required for making sense of those responses in a more structured and holistic way. And aside to events, we can add, clearly we can specify the assets that are involved in a kind of more fine-grained things, and we can use the linked data principles for all of this. Clearly, I'm not kind of bragging about that. I assume that this is a given for this audience. And then we can enrich this representation with policies graphs. So where clearly we can trace ownership, licenses, terms of use, and we can reason then on how they interact with the way these activities are performed with the actual assets. So just as a recap, so why data journeys are useful for citizen curation? So I think they are essential for sense making. So we can't make sense of user responses and interpret user responses without the context where they're built, they're being generated. We need to, they will allow to support analytics, covering multiple dimensions, so we can preserve responses, as I said, in context, and study better similarities and differences across communities, but also across time. Okay? These structured representations and events will allow to trace where content has been generated, so to monitor, to support applications for monitoring sensitive content, tracing ownership, and clearly, as I think I already said, support fine-grained annotations or terms of use. So in addition, this is really opens a kind of important opportunities for research, in particular from the point of view of understanding culture and reception and the dynamic of it in time. Heritage institutions, we know they're typically strongly characterized geographically and culturally. So what is sensitive at some point in time may not be sensitive anymore at another point in time. And these type of representations, if it becomes a kind of first-class citizen in cultural heritage archives, it can allow a lot of interesting information to be preserved. Okay. And the granularity of this information will allow to reason very in a fine-grained way with terms and conditions, and possibly open new opportunities for rights management. And this applies also to the way we conceptualize composite objects. And we don't know yet very well what happens when you put different objects with different copyrights or terms of use together, and you don't know what this new object should be, how it should be treated. Okay, and this is my last slide. So as a recap, so citizen curation generates a lot of user-generated content that is of great value to cultural heritage institutions. And what I'm saying today is that a knowledge organization system based on data journeys can help in capturing this complexity and support sense-making, content moderation, and rights management. In particularly, if we extend data journeys to incorporate event traces. However, to support this vision, the role of mediators is fundamental. So it is an open question now, and clearly cannot be part of this talk, what type of infrastructure can support this citizen curation at scale with capturing events and supporting this data journey style representation.